old school Porsche with an old school 4-cylinder. Let's get right into it. Woohoo! Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video here on Auto Wisdom. Today we have the absolute privilege of sitting behind the wheel of a very unique car, which is a 1984 Porsche 944. This car has a lot of history behind it and quite a bit of racing pedigree that makes it very interesting to learn about, and an excellent buy if you're in the market for a vintage Porsche at an affordable price tag. In the late 1970s and the early 1980s, Porsche had developed a car known as the 924, which was designed and engineered in partnership with Volkswagen. It was actually even sold as a Volkswagen model in certain markets. Now, this was the entry-level offering to Porsche's sports car lineup, and the car found a decent amount of success over the years. However, Porsche, and especially many of the enthusiasts, were looking for something a little more out of this platform. They were looking for a little bit more power and a little bit more of a bespoke design if they were going to be investing their hard-earned money into a brand or a car such as a Porsche. Over time, the 924 had been introduced in a number of European racing events, and eventually Porsche decided to design a prototype vehicle known as the 924 GTP Le Mans. Now, this car ended up competing in Le Mans in addition to a number of other racing events, and proved to have a great amount of success with a more powerful turbocharged 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine, upgraded suspension, braking power. This was a force to be reckoned with, and when Porsche ended up unveiling the 944 to the general public, it was based on the 924. The car received wider bodywork overall that was based on the 924 race car, a new front fascia, a brand new 2.5-liter inline 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine that had been bespoke and developed in-house from the Porsche brand. This was not a Volkswagen offering. Upgraded brakes, upgraded suspension, and this car over the years received many variants and facelifts, and eventually ended up becoming the best-selling production vehicle Porsche had ever built prior to the 986 Boxster and the eventual 997 911 Carrera. Now, if you guys are interested in some additional Porsche content, my most recent review was actually of a 986 Boxster S, a very pristine example, so make sure to check that out, and I will go ahead and leave a card up to that at the top of the screen. In total, Porsche produced over 163,000 units of the 944 globally, which meant that not only was there an immense volume of these cars being driven all across the world, but it also eventually brought the cost of ownership down quite a bit in terms of parts, in terms of building aftermarket support for the car, and in terms of their overall market values. The 2.5-liter engine in this car is a naturally aspirated unit. It sits at a 45-degree angle in the engine bay, and it employs a series of counterweight balancing shafts to improve the smoothness and reduce vibrations that are coming from the engine itself. So, in theory, you're essentially getting the smoothness of an inline 6-cylinder engine in a 4-cylinder configuration. In addition to that, this car also is a transaxle setup, meaning that the transmission and differential are built as one unit, and that effectively evens out the weight distribution of this car to a near perfect 50-50. The 2.5-liter engine, which is codenamed the M44, is not the most powerful thing in the world, and power figures are hotly disputed across a wide variety of sources across the internet. However, from what I've been able to gather, this 1984 model in particular is producing around 150 horsepower, which for the early 1980s is actually not all that bad. And driving this car, I had very low expectations for it in terms of its overall power figures. It's actually quicker and somewhat torquier than I was expecting it to be. It's not fast by any means, but given my extremely low expectations for the straight line performance of the car, I was thoroughly impressed with the oomph that this 2.5-liter 4-cylinder is able to provide. In addition to that, the handling is actually quite nice. So given the fact that this does have the 50-50 weight distribution as a result of that transaxle setup, we have a McPherson strut front end suspension design along with rear coil springs, shock absorbers, and trailing arms. Now, body roll is certainly evident to some degree. I think these cars could definitely benefit from a set of beefier sway bars. But for what it is, an early to mid 1980s vehicle, the handling is definitely not as bad as I would have thought. The steering in the 944 is also incredibly communicative. I really enjoy the feeling that that hydraulic setup gives you so much feedback through the wheel from the various, surfaces in the road, and you can really just kind of feel the front end of the car loading up. You can feel the suspension and the front axle just translating everything that it's feeling through the road into your hands and the steering wheel. Further adding to that is also the driving position of the vehicle, which is lovely. Because this is a 1980s vehicle, it's somewhat retro, you just have very thin A-pillars, you have excellent visibility through the windshield itself, and truthfully, you don't really have any blind spots with the car. You can see from every corner out of this car so well. There's just a ton of visibility, and it really makes driving this car not so intimidating, and it just feels very friendly to get into and just to start ripping on. What I don't enjoy is how high the seating position of this vehicle is. It's actually to the point where it's intrusive with the steering wheel. The steering wheel, on one hand, is very low, and the gauge cluster is also low to the ground as well, but the seats sit up really high, and what's happening is my thigh is kind of running into the steering wheel as I'm driving this car. It's something that you'll definitely get accustomed to if you are owning one of these cars. But if I had to really choose a gripe for the interior of this vehicle, that is definitely something I am not enjoying as well. And while the handling of this car is quite good for what it is, it's on the stock suspension setup as well. It's just really amazing to see how far chassis technology and material science has come in the last few decades. You can definitely feel a decent amount of flex with the chassis and the body itself, and there does feel like there is a decent lack of torsional rigidity coming through the car. However, that is all stuff that can be fixed with the aftermarket, particularly with some good suspension upgrades and some better tires. These things, I have a feeling, can be very, very fast, and I know they make great entry-level track vehicles for a lot of enthusiasts. Power delivery of this 4-cylinder engine is very, very smooth, and it doesn't have the highest redline. It'll top out at around 6,500 RPM, and even then, you don't really need to bring it all the way to redline. I feel like there is somewhat of a drop-off after 5,000 RPM in this vehicle, and so you can kind of short shift it just a tad bit early. What's also slightly comical about this car is just how long the gearing is. It kind of reminds me of a modern Porsche Cayman, where the gearing is just way too long for what it is. And while this engine has a decent amount of torque to kind of pull you throughout the RPM range, I feel like it could benefit from some shorter gearing as well. In terms of modifications, this car is mostly stock. It's on the stock suspension, stock engine. However, the owner of this vehicle has done a primary cat delete on the vehicle to increase power and just aid with the exhaust noise, in addition to a simple short throw shifter kit. And that's about it. So it's very period correct and very OEM plus in that sense. And I really like the design of this car. This 944 has a degree of cool factor to it that is just not present in a lot of vehicles and even a lot of modern sports cars today. While it doesn't boast the most immense performance characteristics by any means, it's an old school Porsche that has so much pedigree behind it, not only from a racing and motorsport perspective, but when you read up on the history of these things, it's just truly incredible to see the development process of these cars. And given the fact that this was one of the best-selling vehicles at the time, I can definitely see why. It's a lot of fun to cruise around in, and it gives you that old school vintage feeling, even from just all the tactile elements, from the steering to the shifter and the old school HVAC controls and the old school dials in the gauge cluster. There's no screens, there's no excessive use of buttons. And it's really cool to be able to get this type of experience for around $10,000. I mean, this example only has around 100,000 miles on it, I believe, and it's really in excellent shape. It's been a Southern California car all its life. It's been garaged quite a bit. It's never been tracked or abused heavily, and I just think it's aged very well. It just has a very, very nice design with a very unique body style to it that I can appreciate, and I'm sure many other enthusiasts can as well. So with all that being said, guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's review. I hope you all enjoyed. If I look like I am drenched in sweat, that is because I am. It is a hot day and there is no AC in this car at the moment. So it's been very tough to stay dry while sitting behind the wheel of this vehicle. But nonetheless, I appreciate your support, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, my friends. Bye-bye.